This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Adam Har, Leonard Tatangia, Carolyn Dionizio, and DW, who all just signed up this month to support us on Patreon, and to Natalia Neuromancer, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. Natalia writes, "Geek's Guide to the Galaxy means so much to me. Thanks for all the hard work that goes into making such an incredible podcast." So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 413 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the animated 80s fantasy movies Heavy Metal, Fire and Ice, The Flight of Dragons, The Black Cauldron, and The Last Unicorn. And this will involve spoilers for all of those movies, so just be aware of that. And if you enjoy this topic, you might also want to check out our previous panels on 80s movies back in episodes 371, 378, and 406. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 14th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's the former script supervisor for Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and is currently a staff writer at WWE's Friday Night SmackDown. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks, good to be back.
The next up, we've got Tom Gerencer, making his 12th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction. His nonfiction book Think Like Google is out now, and his short story All Our Donkeys Were in Vain appears in the new anthology The Best of Galaxy's Edge 2015 to 2017. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
And also joining us today is Matthew Kressel, also making his 12th appearance on the show. He's the author of the novel King of Shards, and his short story The Last Novelist, or A Dead Lizard in the Yard, was nominated for the Nebula Award and was a finalist for the U.G. Foster Memorial Award. His new novel Queen of Static is available now on his Patreon page over at patreon.com/Matt Kressel. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, great to be back.
Okay, so let's start off with Andrea, and have you tell us if you had ever heard of any of these movies before going into this panel.
Yes, Heavy Metal, obviously, and The Last Unicorn. And I think I had heard of the Black Cauldron. I don't think I'd ever seen it. But I had seen Heavy Metal, had seen The Last Unicorn. The other two, never heard of them. Not surprised, actually, when I watched them. But
so
sorry.
let's not get too ahead of ourselves.
Okay,
so what sort of memories, if any, do you have of Heavy Metal and The Last Unicorn?
Well, Heavy Metal, my brother used to read the magazine. So he got the magazine, and it's lots of Frank Frazetta, naked women in chainmail, bikinis, and so of course I wanted to look at all that because, that was, I was a kid, I was like 10, 11, 12, and it was off limits. So I remember the magazine, and then the movie, I honest to God don't remember when I saw it. I know I'd seen it. I don't remember how or when. And it was seeing it again was a completely different experience.
Let me just say, because I've never actually seen that magazine. I kind of heard of it for years.
Oh, really?
And,
oh, yeah. I used to subscribe to it.
Yeah.
I didn't have any older siblings, so I had no one to give it to me. But yeah, so I was just reading up on it a little bit. It was originally, there was a French magazine called Metal Hurlant, which means howling metal, and then they sort of did an American or English language version. And certainly the sense I get is that it's kind of like the audience was like teenage boys who would get in trouble if they tried to buy a Playboy or something.
Yeah,
but could buy this, and it was sort of like the next best thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. My friends, I didn't subscribe to it, but my friends did. And we used to always look at it in the, if you went in the bookstore, which was like one of the things you did when you were bored back then, we would just walk right back to the back of the store where they had that and check it out.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just jump in and say, like, I've subscribed to it as an adult. Like about 10 years ago, I had a subscription for a while, and it's like, yeah, there's of course like, so each issue is maybe like 5 or 6 mini graphic novels, and a lot of them, like, the stories aren't great, they don't make sense, but like maybe one of them will have like, or two of them will have like, explicit nudity, but like some of the others are just like gonzo science fiction. And, I feel like in some ways it's sort of like a like sandbox for wannabe graphic novelists to just try stuff and see if it sticks. So like people just submit, like they do short stories to magazines, they'll submit their graphic novel to heavy metal, and so not everything, like I want to just go out there and say, like, for graphic artists who are listening, be like, hey, it's not all porn. Like, it's, yeah, there's like they have a history there, like, well, we need at least 2 breasts in every issue. I don't know what their quota is on that, but it's not all that.
Well, yeah, I will say that the sense I get from just like reading up on it and listening to people talk about it is that it is a place where artists go to draw what they really have always wanted to draw, which in many cases breasts that they haven't been allowed to. But,
well, you could do that now on like DeviantArt or something.
Yeah.
Matthew, do you read Playboy for the articles?
Only for the fiction.
Yeah, well, I gotta say, it's got some of my favorite fiction ever came out of Playboy. Most of Robert Sheckley came out of there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a history connecting heavy metal to Blade Runner. So heavy metal was one of the first places that the artist Mobius appeared, Jean Giraud. And Jean Giraud teamed up with Jodorowsky, who did the famous like Dune attempt, to create something called the Inkle, which I think we mentioned in our Aeon Flux episode. Yeah. But the Inkle, like, a lot of that art was the inspiration when Ridley Scott was doing Blade Runner. He was like, oh, I want it to look like the Inkle that I saw in heavy metal. So it's like it's kind of a cool connection there.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm definitely not by any means an expert on animated movies. And so it was amazing how many connections I never knew about doing research for all this stuff that maybe we can get into between Blade Runner and all these kind of stuff. But before that, let's just get, see Matt, since we're talking to you, do you have, how many of these movies did you ever heard of before this panel?
Definitely saw heavy metal. Last Unicorn, I feel like I have seen, but when I watched it, I think I watched it for the first time about 20 years ago. And I mean, I watched it 20 years ago and I was like, I don't remember this. So maybe I hadn't seen it. So, and the Black Cauldron, I feel like when I was a kid, it was everywhere. It was like, all I heard everywhere was, oh, the Black Cauldron, the Black Cauldron. But sitting down and watching it for this podcast, I don't remember ever seeing it. So it could just be that my memory's terrible and I had forgotten it. But I have a very explicit memory of seeing heavy metal on, it was probably HBO at the time. And so I'm watching it, like I just turn it on one night and it's this animated thing and it has this very sort of, I want to say like familiar animation style that I'd seen in other, animated shows for children. Like I was a huge G.I. Joe watcher and Voltron, although I don't know if Voltron was on at the time. So like this thing comes on, like, oh, cool. And then within 5 minutes, like, this astronaut dies horribly while his daughter watches. And I remember being like, what the hell am I watching? And then like the next scene is like the taxi driver just evaporating the passenger in the back seat. And then, there's a scene where like one of the guys is like, he's naked. It's actually John Candy, but he gets teleported to the other world and he becomes this big buff guy.
Okay, wait. So now we're not into our discussion of heavy metal yet.
Okay, we're not? All right. Well, all I'm saying is that basically I realized that like Andrea, I was in dangerous territory. And it wasn't the magazine, it was the movie. And it kind of freaked me out when I first saw it because I wasn't expecting a cartoon to be that violent. But it was definitely like, I remembered it ever since. But the others, I probably have heard of Fire and Ice. Definitely the logo. Like I saw that logo, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. But I don't think I had ever seen it before this.
Yeah, so I'll say, I mean, I watched I've probably seen The Last Unicorn, who even knows, 50 times. I could quote the whole movie from memory. I saw The Black Cauldron when it was in theaters. But I hadn't watched it since. I just rewatched it. The only like I'd seen maybe a little bit of Fire and Ice and Heavy Metal. I definitely saw the part where the sword woman warrior rides around on the bird. I saw like part of that on TV one time, but I don't think I had seen the rest of it, and I'd never heard of The Flight of Dragons before. So how about Tom? How much experience did you have with these things?
Same as Matthew, almost exactly. Heavy Metal I had seen over and over again, and absolutely loved it when I was a kid, and watched it with my friends. Watched it at parties and stuff. It would just be on kind of in the background. And then Black Cauldron never saw, but there was a really heavy ad campaign, I think, where it would just be like you'd be watching TV and it would be like Disney's The Black Cauldron, and they would go on.
It was the most
it.
expensive animated movie ever made when it came out, so it's not surprising there was a big promo campaign for it.
Yeah, so I fully had that. Like when I saw the title of it, I was like, oh yeah, I know that movie. And then when I watched it, I was like, oh no, I never saw this movie. and then the other ones I just never heard of at all ever before. So.
All right, so now we're into discussing Heavy Metal.
Okay.
So Tom, when you say you would watch it at parties, I'm assuming these were stoner parties, or
no, they weren't. For one thing, I mean, there wasn't really. I don't think there was such thing as a stoner when I was a kid. There were like the bad kids who would like drink and smoke pot, and then there were like the clean kids who wouldn't smoke any pot but would drink a little bit. But I think, the movie came out in 1981, which I did not realize. So I would have been, before junior high even, I think, because I graduated in 87. So, but no, I watched it when VCRs became a thing and everybody had a VCR, and then people would rent it, and then it would be on HBO, like Matthew said. And so it was more when I was like in high school, and I would watch it then. But, was thoroughly blown away by it. Absolutely loved the Dar story with John Candy. Like, that was absolutely my favorite one. The other ones I thought were cool, like the concepts were cool. Like, I was like, oh, such a cool concept. And then, going back and watching them again wasn't really, just was kind of like, oh, okay, not really a great story, but still a cool concept. And then except for as it gets toward the end, it gets more kind of, they were just kind of like, okay, we need some extra time here, we'll throw this story into and put a lot of crazy visuals with it.
Let me explain. So there's this frame story that Matt mentioned where there's this astronaut kind of like in a spacesuit, like gets in a car and like falls in through the atmosphere and lands on Earth and goes home to his daughter with some glowing green orb that he's acquired in space, presumably somewhere. And it kills him, and then it sort of like terrifies her and like psychically transmits images into her mind. And so then the film is sort of composed of these stories, which are like supposedly the stories that the glowing green orb is telling to the little girl. And they're all stories, as I understand it, maybe with one or two exceptions, that were originally appeared in the magazine and were kind of adapted for animation. And so,
and I would sum that up even quicker by saying it's an anthology of unrelated science fiction and fantasy stories loosely connected by a mysterious, levitating, orb-like pair of breasts.
Let me just describe the stories, right? So there's a cab driver picks up a hot chick with huge breasts. There's like a nerdy kid who gets transported. He gets transported to an alien world, very like John Carter of Mars style, where he interacts with lots of chicks with big breasts. There's a warrior woman.
A theme here,
yeah, there's
David.
a theme.
I sense a theme.
There's a warrior woman who like spends half the episode getting dressed very, very slowly, who has huge breasts. And then like
it's the same pair of breasts in every single way. Like that's the artist just like used. Sorry to interrupt, but
let me finish. So there's these aliens who abduct a secretary with huge breasts. And then there's like a captain. Then there's a space captain who's put on trial, and like some zombies aboard a B-17 bomber in World War II.
Were there breasts in that? There weren't breasts in that.
I don't think
not
in those
the World War II one.
Two, I'm not sure if there were,
and not the captain on trial one. Okay,
yeah.
So two without breasts.
But so we're picking up. You may be picking up on a little bit of a theme here. So
yes.
So Andrea, had you ever? You said you had seen Heavy Metal before, right?
Yeah, I know I'd seen it, or at least parts of it. I don't remember how. Matt said HBO, and that's probably where I saw it. I didn't love it at the time. I was just kind of like, eh. You know, I like a nice big narrative arc, wasn't into anthologies, and also, you know, boobies. But but watching it again, I gotta say, I thought it was fantastic. It's great animation, it's great writing, it's got a great cast. It's out of Canada, so it's got the whole cast of SCTV in it practically doing the voices.
Yeah.
It's funny, it's smart, you know, aside from the boobies. You know, the last one, the Tarna one, which is the woman who dresses slowly and rides a bird, is very like proto Aeon Flux. There's, you know, the two women, the cab driver woman and I think one other woman. I swear to God, it's the same animation as like, I don't know if this is aging. I'm going to tell you exactly how old I am, but reading the comics when I was a kid, the Blondie comics, it's exactly what she looks like.
Oh, yeah.
There's like Betty Boop, the big eyes, the red lips, the hair.
Yeah.
There's a lot of animation references, especially because that was done in the 70s and 80s of previous animation in comics that you won't get unless you're like that old.
Well,
and I just thought it was smart and funny, well written. You know, aside from the boobies part.
Well, that's interesting because, you know, I was sort of underwhelmed by this. And it's interesting you mentioned Aeon Flux because I love, you know, as I said before, I love Aeon Flux. And I sort of felt like this was, I really liked the visual aesthetic and the attitude. And I actually liked the anthology format. But I just felt like the stories were kind of weak. Like at the end of each one, I was kind of like, oh, all right, whatever. And I really felt like they should have had fewer stories and had the characters and the plots be more developed.
Well, you know what? I think it might have had to do with the fact that I didn't have great expectations going into it because I don't remember loving it when I first saw it. So the fact that it was a whole lot more interesting as an adult than it was when I was a teenager, maybe that's probably why I'm giving it higher marks. But I started it first. I watched it first because I was like, oh, I'm going to hate this. I'll just get it out of the way. And then I ended up really liking it.
See, Matt, let's go back to you. So what pick up on how much do you like heavy metal?
I like it. I don't love it. It's not a movie that I would be like, oh, I need to rewatch that to pick up all the nuances. I mean, there's some great humor in it, like, you know, where the you know, woman, the abducted secretary, who's, by the way, the only woman in the room of, like, you know, the chief executives in the war room in the Pentagon. The only woman is the secretary, right?
Yep.
So she gets abducted, and then, you know, she hangs out with this robot who I think is John Candy.
John Candy,
right?
Yep.
And they, of course, sleep together. And then she goes, you know, I can't marry you. Mixed marriages never work. And I was like, I love that. And then she's like, all right, I will marry you, but it needs to be a Jewish wedding. Yeah. It's like, that's just, I mean, like, so there were some moments of humor in it that really made me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Definitely the art style. I think, I think it was, the first one and the last one. The last one, more than any, reminded me of, the Jean Girard, like the Mobius, the Inkle style.
Yeah,
like,
well, apparently, wait, can I find it? Apparently there was something that Mobius did called Arzak that they wanted to adapt, and they couldn't get the rights to it, so they did kind of like an Arzak ripoff, but it was like very consciously supposed to look like Mobius.
Yeah, like the hats that they're wearing and the clothing. Like if you read the Inkle, you're like, oh, that's exactly it. So like I enjoyed that aspect of it. I think probably my favorite one, I forget the character's name, but the John Candy boy where he gets, you know, Den.
Yeah.
Den, that's right, Den.
Yeah, so where he gets like, you know, teleported through space into that, like, you know, Robert E. Howard kind of Clark Ashton Smith fantasy world, which I had a lot of fun with that. I mean, it was just really campy and silly, but it was also, I thought in a way it was very inventive, in kind of the way that I liked how Flash Gordon just created, you know, we talked about the movie, but it just created this like really weird alien landscape. So that part of it worked for me. I think my least favorite one was actually the zombies on the bomber. But yeah, it was fun. I think the episode with the 80s cab driver, like it's 80s cab driver. It's supposed to be 21
yeah.
one or something. And I'm just like, man, that's 11 years from now. That's crazy.
Didn't it remind you of Fifth Element?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
In
Yeah,
fact,
it was...
his apartment, his bathroom, his bathroom was actually right out of Blade Runner. I'm like, I wonder if, you know, they just, I think they came out the same year. So I don't know if, you know, the art directors were talking to each other, but yeah, definitely Fifth Element. But it was just like his whole attitude, you know, like, yeah, I'm just another New Yorker driving a cab, but it was like, you know, in the future, I liked it. I liked his attitude, but yeah, I mean, it didn't age well, that's for sure. I don't know. It was fun to watch, but I don't have any great desire to watch it again.
Yeah,
Tom. Andrea, Andrea, that I have a group of friends who was really into movies when I used to live in Maine, and even up into their, you know, 30s and 40s, we would talk about movies together and go see movies together. And all of them, when The Fifth Element came out, hated it because they said it was just a ripoff of the first story in Heavy Metal. which I was like, come on, there's a lot more there. It's kind of like the same aesthetic, but it's not like they ripped off the whole movie. Like the movie has got its own thing going on, but they to a person were like, no way, they just ripped it off. It stinks.
But it's just the cab driver in a dystopian future New York. Right. I mean, that's it.
Well, who gets the red-haired?
Who gets the redhead girl? Yeah.
And there's like the flying cars and stuff.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. But no, I absolutely loved this when I was younger. I agree about the Den story with John Candy. I think what makes that so good is that they have him be like this, you know, prepubescent or just on the cusp of pubescence boy, and he keeps coming in and interjecting all these things. Like when he sees the woman and she's got, you know, this really voluptuous naked body, he's like, first thing he says is, "She had the most beautiful eyes."
Yes.
Just like lines like that coming out one after the other just busted me up, and make that character so endearing. It would be different if he was just like this invincible, like giant guy, but no, he's this young boy who's watching it. So you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I would say. That's so funny. Back then, I think one of the things that makes it not age well is I don't think the audio comes across anymore. Something happened to it maybe, or just maybe it was just the way I watched it off my phone. But when I was a kid, it was almost all about the music, or at least half of it was about the music. I mean, these were all big time hit songs that we loved back then, that everybody loved. They were really popular songs.
Yep.
And to see it played out and the sound on the VHS tape. I took an audio engineering class in college, and VHS tape has really good audio because it's like, I don't know, it's super thick tape. It's got a lot of bandwidth for audio. And I feel like that gets lost even in digital, which ought to be good. But back then, you know, on a VHS with a decent speaker system hooked up to it, you'd be watching it in your living room, and the sound of these musical pieces would just fill the room. And that was a big part of it. It was like, you know, I'm glad there's a story there. And you guys made good points. Like the stories aren't really super strong, but back then that was only part of it. And just another point about the stories, this really reminds me a lot of, what was it called? Love, Death, and Robots, or Sex, Death, and Robots that we reviewed recently.
Yeah, Love, Death, and Robots.
It reminded me a lot of that, in that the stories are kind of truncated. Like, Matthew, you pointed out the bomber one was your least favorite. I remember loving that as a kid, and as an adult, I'm like, okay, well, there's not really much of a story. It's just kind of like this creepy thing happens, and there's a twist ending.
Actually, let me say, Tom. I mean, I read, I can't remember now who was involved, but they were trying to reboot Heavy Metal, and after a while there was something with the rights or something, and so they just did Love, Death, and Robots instead. But
really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, now it all comes clear. Okay, because it's just like really cool, shocking stories, and they don't really care so much if it is a story, so much as it's something cool that they can do visually in a good way.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I didn't even connect the two.
Makes total sense. So I would still recommend this, but less than I would have when I was younger. Like, I remembered it being just like flawless, and now I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, a lot of these are, you know, so. But I still would say, you know, definitely go and watch it.
Yeah, we need to move on to the next movie, but I just want to. One thing I want to mention is that apparently, you know, we mentioned the opening. There's the a car coming through the atmosphere with the astronaut in it, and apparently that made a big impression on Elon Musk.
I was just gonna say, it looks like the Tesla they shot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
It
where.
also reminded me of MTV,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
visuals from early MTV.
Yeah, I think it seems like it must have been some of the same artists.
All right, cool. So let's move on to Fire and Ice, 1983. So this is Ralph Bakshi is the director, who's best known for doing the animated Lord of the Rings from 1978, and whose debut feature film, Fritz the Cat, was the first animated feature film to receive an X rating, and is still apparently the most successful independent animated feature film of all time.
Wow.
And so he was, because they used the X rating as a marketing thing and got lots of people to go see it. But so he was friends with Frank Frazetta and wanted to do basically like take Frank Frazetta's paintings and turn them into an animated movie. And so that's kind of what Fire and Ice is. So yeah, Frank Frazetta, very like, bodybuilder, swordsman and voluptuous women fighting exotic monsters on vibrantly colored alien worlds and stuff like that. So that's all what this is. So Andrea, what'd you think of Fire and Ice?
For me, was this thing hellaciously racist?
No, yeah, I had that same thought early on.
Yeah, basically my entire reaction to it was, Jesus fucking Christ! Yeah, it made me actively angry at, the bad guys were all dark-skinned, and the good guy is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, and, all the women are just basically porn stars. There's this one scene where you meet the princess right at the beginning, where she's in her room, and she lies back on a seat and puts her legs up in the air, and it's like, that's a stripper move. Like, if you go into a strip club, that's what they do. It was like, everything about it was so awful. I've never hated anything so much in my life. I loathed it. Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I'll grant you, it's definitely problematic. Not just with the they're called the subhumans.
Yes, exactly.
The sort of orc-like monsters, but also the villain Necron is kind of like
ambiguously gay.
Yeah, like not into women so much.
Yes.
It seems. And the Princess Tigra, like all of her frames of animation seem to have been constructed by tracing porn magazines.
Well, actually, I was just reading about it. It's rotoscoped. It's not.
Well, obviously.
Yeah. So it's live action.
I'm just saying, in terms of the poses that she's in, no matter whether she's running from monsters or fighting or whatever, it's always some like porn kind of pose.
Yeah, it's stripper porn. It was.
How do you guys know this?
What, the rotoscope or the?
No, how do you know what strippers do? I'm just curious.
I've seen movies.
I'm just kidding.
Research.
You never been to a strip club?
I'm just joking. I'm only.
All right, but I'll say I was not expecting to like this at all. I don't like the rotoscoped animation in general. I think it looks kind of like fake, and the characters don't seem to be really fit into the environment and stuff like that. But I actually thought this was kind of awesome. I ended up having a good time watching it. I don't know, but how about Matt? What'd you think of Fire and Ice?
I had the same reaction as Andrea when the the evil hordes come in and they're all dark skinned. I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening here? I thought the story to me was just really boring. It was just one battle scene after another. But with that being said, I really loved the setting in this, and I thought the matte paintings in the background were fantastic. And something about the rotoscope style, although it was a little retro, there was something natural about it, I guess because they were real actors, that I just found engrossing. So, I mean, it wasn't obviously the naked bodies or anything. But no, it was just like the world that they created. He's just like walking through the woods and there's like a monster. I felt like I was in a D&D world, which I think is what they really were trying to capture. And I thought the world did that effectively. Whether or not, I thought the story definitely didn't work.
My issue with so many of these things is that the dialogue is just so awful. And
Yeah,
so
it was
I actually
horrible.
felt that this was like, it worked better because the dialogue is fairly minimal and it's pretty much just a bunch of action scenes. And I would much rather watch that in this kind of movie than sort of sit through these interminable, terrible dialogue scenes. But let's get Tom in here. Tom, what did you think of Fire and Ice?
Well, first of all, I didn't realize Fritz the Cat was so successful. That was a big time, it was one of those movies that my friends would get together and watch and be like, check this out, it's an X-rated cartoon, and we'd watch it and be like, that's hilarious, the cat's doing all these rude things. But you know, Matthew, I feel like you kind of were trending toward like a Kevin Nealon as a movie critic. Remember he did that on Saturday Night Live where he'd be like, I started watching this, I wasn't interested. Then suddenly I started to get a little interested when he started, his like his kind of like porn reviewer type of thing. I got more interested, then I was very interested, and then suddenly I lost interest. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was classic. But I kind of think you could apply that to. I would love to see his review of any of these movies because they all have to. It seems like the criteria for making a 1980s. Animated fantasy movie is you've got to have large breasts in it somewhere, unless it's Disney, and then it didn't happen. But
no, even in the Disney, I mean, we'll get to that later, but like even the like children's cartoons in this involved characters being smushed between giant breasts.
Oh yeah, that's right.
All right.
But we'll get to that. But sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Okay, I must have blocked that out or something. But I'm but anyway, so. I thought, number one, this definitely has the whole, like, thews and, THEWS instead of muscles, like, pendulous breasts, like the whole Piers Anthony kind of aesthetic where you can imagine, I don't know if you guys have read The Stand by Stephen King, but the Harold Lauder character, the guy who's, like, starts out as the overweight nerd and then turns into the, like, scary, kind of sub-villain. That character, you can picture him at the beginning just loving this, like being like, this is my favorite movie ever.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it had a kind of a cool story. I thought the art was really amazing and it kind of wouldn't play to today's audiences kind of way. I saw in the trivia in IMDb that they had 1,000+ background paintings done for this movie.
Wow.
So I thought, back then they couldn't do the CGI stuff, so they had to hire like painters to do like
a lot of the work. Tom, did you know? So one of the background painters was Thomas Kincaid on this movie.
Oh, really?
So if you don't know, he's this painter. He's like, I think he's the most like best-selling painter of all time. But he paints these sort of like cottages like at twilight with lots of flowers and a river. They're all kind of like the same. It just like blows my mind that I guess they needed someone who could paint a lot of paintings really, really fast.
Yeah, I saw that in the trivia as well, and he apparently he's got like, I don't know anything about him, but apparently he's like in the art world, he's really looked down on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess he's fast, so they were like, oh, this guy's great. So I thought the art, back then the art was absolutely amazing. The rotoscoping was the best way to do this. I thought some of the story was pretty cool, actually. I agree about the racism thing, but I thought the shirtless pigtail Batman character was really cool. I really liked him. I thought the villain was genuinely menacing. Like if you were ever around that guy, he's just like, he reminds me of the kid in the Twilight Zone movie who was like all powerful, but like completely had no empathy at all for other people. And he just like would just, if you said the wrong thing around him, he'd be like, I'm going to take away your mouth, or I'll just kill you.
Send you to the cornfield.
Yeah, exactly. I thought the villain in this was genuinely menacing. But overall, like my boredom meter rating for this was like 3 out of 10. Like I think it was kind of, the whole thing overall was kind of boring to me, but you would have to appreciate the 80s artwork without computer assisted animation and be into that kind of story to enjoy it. And if you're into that kind of thing, then I think you would enjoy this.
I agree, Tom, about some of the like stuff being disturbing. Like I thought a lot of there's the sort of like tentacled monster under the lake. There's the like witch who kind of comes back to life as a skeleton.
The witch was cool. Like she was so creepy and scary. I was like, that was my favorite part, where she like, he walks by and she just climbs up. Like she's just bones and sinew, and she's like, hello.
Yeah, and I like the guy. I don't think they ever say his name in the movie, but it's Darkwolf is the kind of Batman guy. Like all his fight scenes I thought were really like cool. I really, I was into that. Yeah. So I agree with that. So how about Andrea? Any other thoughts on this movie?
Yes. why is everybody naked? Even in the ice world, they're all naked and running around in an ice world naked.
And nobody's cold.
Nobody's cold. Nobody looks even remotely cold. Why at one point does the princess try to cut a chain with a knife? Does she not know how metal works? Why is she an idiot? That redheaded witch is insane. I couldn't understand what she was saying. Why, if they had those pterodactyl flying things, why didn't he send them after the daughter in the first place? Like, they send out these pterodactyls, like, he just kidnapped your daughter? Why don't you use the pterodactyls? That's, like, dumb as... Oh my god, it was dumb.
No, they did. No, he did. He sends out the pterodactyls to look for the daughter.
Oh, well, I missed that, but how did they not find her?
They would never get through. They didn't do it sooner because he said, oh, they'll never get through. And he's like, well, all right, if just one of us gets through, we can do it. They did kind of explain that.
Well, I thought it was dumb. I thought everybody was dumb.
No, the dumb thing with the pterodactyls is, like, they're in, like, the hero, Lorne and Darkwolf, are in Necron's palace, and for some reason they go all the way back to the good guy castle, and he's like, and they're like, we're gonna go rescue your daughter. He's like, okay, fine, I'll send my pterodactyl guys with you, and then they all get killed. Every single pterodactyl guy gets killed, and they end up just with the two of them back where they started. So they could have just, like, not done any of that, and it would have been exactly the same situation.
Just everything that was so bad. Like, that's the worst offense, war offense I've ever seen. Like, you're real. No wonder you're about to lose your kingdom. You're an idiot. Yeah. When the ice meets the lava, shouldn't there be a giant explosion? Like, I'm sorry, I'm thinking science here, but, like, there should have been a big old boom, and there wasn't. I don't know. I was so distracted by everything I hated about this movie that that's what I was thinking about was, like, should there be an explosion? I just didn't care. I hated it with a passion. It was porny. I hated the characters. Like, I loathed this thing. Sorry, that's it. That's all I got to say about this.
All right. How about Matt?
Did anyone find, like, the similarities interesting between this and, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire, like,
for
Game
sure,
of Thrones, like with the approaching wall from the north? I mean, Wall of Ice. Did Martin ever mention this? Like, was he ever asked? Does this influence his work?
I couldn't find any time he mentioned this. He did mention Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pretty certain. I mean, it's not like Magic Fire versus Magic Ice in a fantasy setting could only have come from this movie, but just given, like, Martin's age and kind of, like, the stuff he's into and things like this, I would not be at all surprised if he saw.
Yeah, it might have even influenced him, subconsciously. I thought it was funny at the beginning, and this wasn't even, like, part of the movie or anything, but, like, Ralph Bakshi's credits, it's like every other name is his, like Ralph Bakshi, Ralph Bakshi.
You know what? Yeah. Speaking of credits, there was a credit at the end that said costumes designed by Frank Frazetta. I'm like, what? It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. What costumes? It's like, they're all wearing loincloths.
I guess for the actors that they did the rotoscoping.
I guess, but, like, they're not wearing anything.
He's like, for this actor, I'm thinking loincloth.
Yeah,
maybe a rope or something around the neck.
Frank.
Yeah.
Wait, let me read some of the trivia. So apparently, so Ralph Bakshi, after, actually I didn't write it down. Oh no, it must have been around the same time. So apparently he was offered to do an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and he didn't want to do it, but he said, why don't you ask my friend Ridley Scott if he wants to do it?
Oh, wow.
So just think, Matt, you could have had a Ralph Bakshi's version instead.
I think I'm happy with the Scott version, actually.
Yes, yeah, thank God that happened.
And apparently also Robert Rodriguez was trying to announced, like 2010 maybe originally. It's been a while, but he was going to remake Fire and Ice, but I don't think that's really happening anymore. But there's hope, Andrea. There's hope that they could do a remake of it.
Less naked women. Less racism.
Yeah.
So, have you seen much Robert Rodriguez stuff? There probably wouldn't be less naked women.
Just at least put them in. I don't know. It just. God.
I mean, did you see Machete? Was it Machete? Where
I did not.
What's the movie where he has Rose McGowan with she gets her leg amputated and gets a machine gun put in place of it, and then she's a stripper, so she does stripper moves and, like, shoots people when she, like, culminates the move.
Yeah, I
Wow.
saw that. I mean, it was
I don't know
it
what
was like
movie
was
it
it
is.
Grindhouse or was like
It was
there were like two
Grindhouse.
movies?
Grindhouse.
It was Grindhouse, yeah. Yeah. So probably not Less Naked Women, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts on Fire and Ice before we move on?
Nope.
Ooh.
No, we're moving on.
That was
Is it
Andrea
air
just
raid?
getting out of here.
Fuck this shit.
What's funny, Matt, that you mentioned George R. R. Martin, because like, yeah, watching a lot of these movies, I can't help but think like, wait, did this influence George R. R. Martin? Like, I've mentioned that in a lot of our previous awesomely bad 80s movies. And in Flight of Dragons, which is the next movie we're going to talk about, there's a character named Melisande. There's the Princess Melisande, which is almost exactly the same name as Melisandre from Song of Ice and Fire. So, yeah.
Actually, Melisande, the first thing I thought of was Jacqueline Carey's Melisande character in
Kushiel, is that Kushiel's star?
the Phaedra books. Kushiel, yes, Kushiel's Dart. Yeah. That was my first thought.
Mm-hmm.
But
So I don't know who. So how? Let me just explain. So this movie, The Flight of Dragons, is Rankin Bass. They'd been doing like stop motion Christmas specials, which had done well enough that they were able to finance real and 2D animated features, like hand drawn animated features. And so they did a bunch. They did like The Hobbit and The Last Unicorn, which we'll be getting to. And then this movie, The Flight of Dragons. I'd never heard of this before. It was just one of the things that was mentioned on one of our previous panels in sort of like 80s sword and sorcery movies. And so like basically I'm a little confused, but basically it seems like there was this guy, Peter Dickinson. And from what I gather, he had written an actual nonfiction book about how he thought dragons had really existed in history. And he had all these like scientific rationalizations for how they could have flown and breathed fire and stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that's what my research seemed to indicate. And so this movie was kind of like inspired by that, and the Peter Dickinson character in the movie is him. And then for the plot, they actually took it from a completely different book called The Dragon and the George by Gordon R. Dickson, who's a kind of well-known fantasy and science fiction author. Sometimes at conventions, you'll see the Dorsai Irregulars are kind of volunteers who help provide security, and that's a reference to his Dorsai novels. So that's this movie. So Tom, what did you think of The Flight of Dragons?
I thought it was really bad artwork, like Wednesday afternoon cartoon special in the 1980s quality artwork, but the acting, they had James Earl Jones in kind of in mid Star Wars trilogy form. They had Harry Morgan, who was from MASH. He's a fantastic actor wherever you put him, even though I kept expecting him to say horse hockey.
Yep.
All the way through, and the writing was clever. I thought it had a well explored theme of nature versus technology. It had something to say. I thought it was worth watching. I thought the scientific explanation of dragons was really cool, and it even explains why they would have small wings and still be able to fly, which has always been like a thing with dragons. And I thought it had some clever dialogue. I know a limpid pool of time when I see one, or I'll inspire Neptune himself, and there'll be great white sharks, and blah blah blah. And then the guy's like, yeah, that's great, but it's going to be on land. Let's kind of table that. And I thought there were some great stuff about it. I don't think I really missed out by not springing for the HD version. The artwork was pretty poor. And, it wasn't certainly the peak of James Earl Jones's career or anything, but I thought it was enjoyable. I thought it had a lot going for it despite the bad artwork.
I agree that the dragon stuff was clever. I think that's definitely the highlight of this movie for me. So yeah, so he basically posits that dragons were kind of like blimps, basically, that they, that they, I don't know, somehow they have hydrogen gas inside them and set some of it on fire and stuff, and that helps them float like balloons, so they don't you use their wings really for lift. So that was kind of clever. And then the part where he says, "Oh, the reason dragons sleep on gold is because like they can't sleep on anything else because they set it on. They can't sleep on anything non-metallic because they set it on fire. And then gold is this soft, comfortable metal to sleep on." I was like, "Oh, that's actually pretty clever."
A soft, comfortable metal.
So Matt, what'd you think of The Flight of Dragons?
You have Harry Morgan as a voice actor in anything, and I'm all in. Like this old guy from MASH, like telling me the story. I'm like, take take me wherever you go, and I'm with you. And then you throw in John Ritter, and it's like, forget it, I'm sold. I really enjoyed this. I thought the humor of the dragons, like I liked that some of the dragons were kind of dopey and a little well, all dragons are sneaky, but I like the idea of that this one more than some of the others was like quote unquote multicultural, because they had like, the Asian wizard and then the wizard from the cold area who was dark skinned, so it wasn't all like white skinned people. A little problematic in that the Asian wizard was yellow, but maybe they didn't think too hard about that one. I don't think it was intentional. There's some weird pedophilia in it where like the old knight was like, I promised to fall in love with her when she was of age. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, did he really just say that? Like, she's 12 and you're like 50. But like there was really great humor in this. Like the dragon and the main character Peter, like they get really drunk and then they wake up and the whole place is like destroyed, and they're like, don't say anything, like let's just walk away and pretend nothing happened. So I guess my biggest gripe with this was that there was this promise that somehow Peter was going to unite science and fantasy, and I thought there was going to be this, like, the way he was going to defeat the wizard was using, like, defeat the evil guy was by using, science, right? To say, oh, well, if I just combine these two elements and then blah, blah, blah. And instead it was just like, oh, I'm going to read my physics 101 textbook to him. Force equals mass times acceleration, I know. A squared equals B squared plus C squared. Like, he wasn't saying anything. He was just like if I go to Wikipedia and like click on a random page and just start reading, like that's what he was doing.
Yeah, I have that note too. So just saying science things wards off evil? What?
Yeah, so I was like, oh, that was such a missed opportunity to like teach kids about real science and, how that might have worked. Especially, like, as you said, I didn't know this, that the impetus for this story was a guy who postulated that dragons were real and tried to use science to show that. Like, I thought, oh, there would be a perfect opportunity to do something cool. I had fun with this. The animation style wasn't great. It was very, very like, as Thomas said, like, Wednesday afternoon, like budget cartoon. But I don't know. I found it really charming.
Yeah, I did think like if it's a kind of movie I would want to show kids to kind of like inspire them to be interested in science. I feel like it's like, I don't know, there's not enough like cartoons that have a message like that. So, I think for adults, the movie is a little boring, but it's got some interesting ideas in it. But so Andrea, what's your overall take on this movie?
Watching it, I felt like it was something that if I had seen it as a kid, I would have loved it. But as an adult, I was, as you said, bored. It was boring. And I spent most of the movie just recognizing references to different books and stories like Lord of the Rings, the Anne McCaffrey books, the Pern books. Where in the Pern books, I read all the Pern books when I was like a teenager. I love them. But the dragons there make fire by chewing on sulfurous rock, and that's how they make fire. I'm like, this was pretty much a similar setup for how they make fire. And like they're owls carrying messages. There's Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Melisande, the blonde princess, is Arwen, and Daniela, is Eowyn. Harry Morgan, I couldn't stop thinking of Colonel Potter. Like, I just couldn't get over
Also,
that.
the old dragon is named Smurgal.
Oh, that's right.
not to be...
And also they had the wizards, the green wizard, the blue wizard, the golden wizard. It's like the white wizard, the gray, Gandalf the gray, white, and the brown.
Yeah, they had a hobbit.
They had a hobbit, exactly. I was a big fan of the Hobbit movie they made in the 70s. I loved it. So this looked exactly like that. So that was, nostalgic for me. But as far as the story went, I was just like, when is this going to be over?
Actually, when the old dragon died, I found that kind of moving. That was probably maybe the only part of the movie I thought was kind of moving.
Oh, and John Ritter was the name, the main guy, Peter Dickinson.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like Jack Tripper through the whole thing too.
Yeah, he was great though.
Yeah, it was yeah. I wouldn't have watched it all the way through. But that said, I know if I had watched it when I was a kid, I would have loved it. It had dragons in it and wizards and magic and shit, and I would have totally loved it. But yeah, as an adult, it was not for me.
Yeah, theme song, Don McLean.
Don McLean! I know, I saw that too. I was like,
Oh,
what?
really?
Yes.
Yeah, these movies, like, even the ones that aren't very good, they had some amazing talent.
Cast.
It's
Yes.
Amazing talent. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's move on to The Black Cauldron, 1985. This is.
Can I just say my boredom meter score for this one is is a 7 out of 10 for this one. You have to be really bored to watch this one. I think.
Black Cauldron?
No. The Flight of Dragons.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Black Cauldron, 1985, Disney movie. This is based on a series of books by Lloyd Alexander, which I read all 5 of them as a kid. I don't remember them all that well. I said I went to this movie as a kid, and there's a scene where it's a like super generic story in this movie. There's like basically farm boy who has a destiny and defeats an evil lord and all this stuff. But there's a part where the main villain is called the Horned King, and he uses the Black Cauldron. Oh, and also this is all stuff out of Welsh mythology, but he uses the Black Cauldron to bring an army of skeletons back to life. And it was really, really scary when I was a kid. I probably saw this when I was literally like 3 or something when I saw this movie.
There's some definitely haunting images in this that, my wife walked in the middle of this and she's like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "Disney." And there's like these evil skeletons rising up from the ground.
Oh, wait, actually, no, sorry. It was 84, so I would have been 7. But I was really, really young. And so actually, when they made this movie, they did a test screening of it before they released it. Let me just read you this. This test screening was held at the studio's private theater in Burbank, California. After the film, particularly that climactic cauldron-born sequence, proved to be too intense and frightening for the majority of the children in the audience, most of whom fled the theater in terror before it was even finished.
Sounds like your typical Disney movie.
Yeah, so if you don't know, this is like famously the biggest flop that Disney ever did. And they literally almost closed down the Disney animation studio after this came out because it was such a disaster.
I stumbled on that Slate article about it, and it was fascinating about what happened and it was, what's his name? The 2 guys came in. Eisner and Katzenberg just came in. That was a flop. And that's when Don Bluth left right then and there. And right after that did Secret of Nim, which I loved as a kid. This movie, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in here, but this movie, I knew the books. I had the books. I don't think I ever read them, but I have the books. But I'd never seen the movie. And I don't think I missed anything because it is not good.
Matt, what do you think of Black Cauldron?
Okay. So
here we go.
I have this problem with a lot of Disney movies, not so much like their latest stuff, but like basically it's story of like narcissistic children, going off on quests. Yeah. So it's basically like this wizard entrusts like the biggest secret the world has, like don't tell anyone that this magic pig can lead the way to the evil Black Cauldron. And then, I'm sending you off into the woods with this piglet, be safe. And then so like immediately the first thing the kid does is he loses the pig.
Yep.
Like, and then he's like dreaming of like, oh, one day I'm going to be famous and I'm going to be this. And he literally like stares into his own reflection, like the Narcissus image. And I was like, okay, like I am not, like, if kids are supposed to identify with this character, I don't know if I would have. I mean, maybe some kids would be like, yeah, I'm going to be, I guess every, a young boy, 12-year-old boy wants to be the sword wielding hero and stuff like that. But there was something just really irritating about him that I was never endeared to. But then, he gets captured by the evil lord, the Horned King. And he's like, "Oh, I'll kill your pig if you don't tell me the secrets." He's like, "Okay, here's the pig." Like, immediately gives the pig away. Like, I'm like, "Oh, okay." I mean, at the end, he sort of has this moment where he's like, "I need to be selfless," and but he doesn't do anything. It's all the sword. It's the magic sword. So I don't know. I was never quite won over by this. I did find that the animation style was, of course, great. It's Disney. It's the little fuzzy guy, I forget his name, sounded exactly like Gollum. Like it was Andy Serkis, like, "My precious, my precious."
Well, I think it's a lot of that has to do with any character that speaks about themselves in the third person.
Yeah.
Kind of it's like a very Gollum-y thing.
But Gurgi is like super obviously a ripoff of Gollum to begin with. Especially like
he's like a furry Gollum in an all-body toupee.
Yeah.
Because at the climax, the climax is like almost the same as the climax of Return of the King, except with him as like a good Gollum instead of an evil Gollum. But you have the same thing. You have to like throw the magic. You're like up on this high cliff, and then you're gonna have to destroy the magic and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought that the scene where all the the dead soldiers are getting revived, and like the green mist is reviving them, and they're coming out, like, that was haunting and really, really cool, but also, absolutely terrifying if I was a kid. So I could see, kids running, screaming from the theater, having watched that.
That is also very Lord of the Rings, where the army of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's really the thing with this movie is that I don't think it's really bad. You would think like you just hear like, oh, this is Disney's biggest flop ever. You would think it would just be like, oh my god, this is atrocious. It's not. It's just like there's nothing that memorable about it. Like everything is sort of like okay, but
it's generic.
Yeah, but it's just really sort of bland fantasy.
I was just annoyed through the whole thing. I just thought it was so childish. And Matt, your point about the narcissistic child, there's one point where he gets the sword and he uses it for the first time. And I'm sorry, they're trying to escape captivity. He stops there looking at the sword, laughing and turning around and around. I'm like, what fucking idiot who's trying to escape captivity stops and laughs at his new sword? Like, it was just, and I know this is all Disney and all that. The girl was annoying. The goofy characters, the little troll thing, annoying. I don't know, maybe if I was a kid, I would have enjoyed it. But
well, he steals from the dead, right? He takes the sword out, and then she's like, "Whoa, you took that off a dead person?" He goes, "Well, he doesn't need it." And like that's something that you would see like a villain or like a robber take from somebody. Like, they're not going to use this, but like it's like your hero. This is the character that your audience is presumably going to identify with, and he's just, yeah, I'll just steal from the dead. They're not using it.
Right. And Matt, I think that's a fine line that you need to walk if you're writing young adult fiction, because I think that's a common theme that like you start out narcissistic and then you gradually start to become selfless. And I mean, look at Luke Skywalker at the beginning of Star Wars. He starts out, just totally concerned about going to Tachi Station to hang out.
A whiny kid.
He's a whiny kid at the beginning.
Whiny kid, but I know we're not talking about Star Wars, but I wouldn't call him narcissistic at that point. I think he's just kind of whiny.
Yeah, you're right. He probably isn't fully narcissistic, but that's why I say there's a recipe there that they don't follow as well in this movie. And I felt that way with Dragon Slayer too, that the main character in that, we reviewed that last time, I couldn't stand, I thought he was way too narcissistic the whole time. And I felt this way about this guy too, but I disagree that, I think you need a certain amount of that. Like, Stephen King points out that in The Shining, he hated the movie The Shining, even though, it's a great movie in a lot of ways, but he hated that. The thing he hated about it was Jack Nicholson starts out crazy from scene one. He's like rolling his eyes. It's okay, honey. He saw it on the television. He's crazy from scene one, whereas Stephen King's point is, no, the character has to gradually get crazy. And I think there's more to this character's redemption in this movie than you're giving it credit for. Like, I really like the scene near the end where he decides to choose Googie over the sword, because you wouldn't think you'd think, oh, isn't it convenient that Googie's like, no, I'll go jump in I'll kill myself.
That was affecting. You're right. Because I was like, okay, he did ultimately at the end, sacrifice himself. Yeah.
But I agree with you that it could have been more. It should have been more gradual. There should have been steps to it instead of just at the end. He suddenly is like, oh, I'm not going to be a jerk anymore. I'm going to be, a little more selfless. But I thought it had a kind of cool story to it. I thought the Disney aesthetic didn't fit at all. I thought the whole Disney, the way they, they are and the way the characters talk and everything was just wrong for this story.
I agree.
And I did think my favorite scene in this, I thought there was a really good scene in this where that frog-like minion, not the Golem, not the Gurgi or whatever, but the minion of the evil guy, where he stops in front of the door and he's like agonizing. He's got to deliver some bad news and he's like agonizing over what's going to happen to him when he delivers it. I'd never seen that in a movie. There's always like the evil sorcerer's minion, and but I had never seen him like stop and be like, oh, this is going to be so bad for me. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to tell him this. Like I was like, wow, I feel that right now. That is amazing.
Yeah.
But overall, I agree. I don't recommend this unless you are some weird mixture of child and adult. And, you're not going to be scared by anything, but you have this really childlike aesthetic for what you think is fun. Then you would like this movie.
I would, if you haven't read the Slate article about it and the history of the movie, I'd suggest you read it because it was really interesting. But the thing they brought up, about this is there's 5 books in this series and they just cherry-picked story points from each of the 5 books, and there is actually a big character arc in the book where he goes from this kid to like an actual hero. But because it's a 5-book story arc, you can't really do that in one movie. So that that's why there's this sense of lack of completion and depth to his change.
That's like there's this fantastically funny movie, unintentionally funny movie called Samurai Assassin. It's like a
I've seen that.
It's so brilliant, but they did the same thing. There were like 8 movies, and they just like cherry picked scenes out of all the different movies and mashed them together.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I hadn't thought about that, Tom. That that this might be a good story, but it's just like the Disney aesthetic is totally wrong for it, and you can't just make a Disney movie out of any story. Like there has to be some match between the material and the visual aesthetic. Yeah,
that was one of my notes I wrote down was too Disney.
Yeah,
way too Disney.
And not that Disney's bad. I mean, if it was Disney and it had a Disney story, fine. But it's just that these elements of like the bringing things back from the dead and the magic pig, which is a good idea. The magic pig that knows the way, that's like telepathic, and that all the elements were kind of cool in a creepy way. But then you match them up with this Disney cutesy, everything's super cute and character driven. Not character driven, but the characters are like, they have a lot of character in their voice. And
I felt like the problem was it wasn't creepy enough. Like it's a creepy story, but it's got this Disney treatment with this cute little pig, which immediately made me think of Charlotte's Web. And I'm like, how can I get scared by Charlotte's Web and this cute little pink pig with the big eyes?
Well, right, and I have nothing against Disney. And I mean, like this, the crushing failure of this set up like this like amazing period for Disney where they had like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, like Beauty and the Beast, all this stuff. But it does seem like there's just something about the Disney aesthetic that does not work, at least with audiences, when they try to do like epic, sword and sorcery or epic fantasy or like space opera, like any of those kinds of things. Like it seems like audiences just don't want the Disney treatment to like,
because those are serious things, and Disney, you can't get seriousness out of Disney. And Disney animation, Disney stories. It just, especially in this era when you're coming off, Snow White is the 40s, but like all those classic Disney movies that I grew up watching and loving, there's no real sense of death or seriousness to them. And this is a serious story.
I picture there being like a term, like a slang term they throw around in like the Disney story department where someone's like, oh, we should do this. And someone's like, no, it's too Black Cauldron.
Yeah.
I want to get Matt back in here. Matt, do you have anything else you want to say about Black Cauldron?
Not really. I did actually enjoy the 3 witches, though. I found them probably the most entertaining part of it. I liked how they hid the cauldron within a million other cauldrons, and just their kind of back and forth shtick with each other, I found amusing. I feel like I'd seen it before, but it was just...
Well, it's Macbeth.
Macbeth, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, just sort of the humor with
See, why doesn't Disney do Macbeth? That would be
seriously.
Disney's Macbeth.
I don't know what you guys are talking about, Macbeth. This is clearly from that Star Trek original series episode where the three witches talk to Captain Kirk. I don't remember that one.
I don't remember that.
I don't remember. But Tom, so you don't remember the part where Fwooder Flom gets turned into a frog and is like trapped between the witch's giant breasts?
No, I don't know how I missed that. What happens?
Yep. He gets stuck between her breasts. Yep.
Oh, I do remember that now. Yes, okay, yeah, I think I had blocked that. Never mind, yes.
So who says that you don't get giant breasts in Disney children's cartoons?
Oh, there you go. They just might not be the kind of giant breasts. They're not the same quality of giant breasts.
Not the same quality, no, not at all.
All right, so on that note, let's move on to our final movie here, The Last Unicorn. So this is legit one of my favorite movies of all time. As I said, I've seen it probably 50 times. I don't even know. I could quote the whole movie from memory. But so obviously I'm not impartial when it comes to this movie, so I don't know how it holds up for adults. I think, Matt, were you the only person who had seen this before?
I've seen it.
Oh,
I saw it about 20 years ago.
Oh, right.
Maybe 15 years ago. Yeah. So I didn't remember it well at all.
Okay, Andrea, did you see this as a kid?
I don't know if I was a kid, but it was whenever it came out. I don't know that I saw it in the theater, but maybe I did see it in the theater.
It was 82 that it came out.
Well, sort of a kid. It didn't make an impression on me at the time. I was just like, and I'd read the book too, and it was just like, eh. But watching it now, it was really spectacular. Like, amazing movie.
Yeah, so the plot is that there's a unicorn, and she starts to feel like she's maybe the last unicorn in the world, and she sets out to find the other unicorns and makes friends with a sort of bumbling wizard named Schmendrick and an older woman named Molly Grew. And she finds out that the unicorns were all driven by this giant flaming monster called the Red Bull, driven to the castle of King Haggard, where they've all vanished. And so they go to King Haggard's castle and to try to figure out what's happened to the other unicorns. And in order to protect the unicorn from the Red Bull, the bumbling magician turns her into a human woman. And so she has to sort of deal with being mortal for the first time. So Matt, what did you think of this movie?
This was my favorite of the five. I found the story really refreshing, that it wasn't your typical hero's quest narrative. I found like they could have done this like really, really badly. This like last unicorn, female who's like, running through the forest, and just, they could have gotten that voice so wrong. And they got it. I think they nailed it. I found that, all the characters were endearing. Like I loved Schmendrick and I loved the, even the evil wizard's son was an interesting character. I thought that like all these movies that we saw, they have this kind of late 70s, early 80s, like acid folk music, like that kind of like, like I feel like we should all be dropping acid and looking at the sky or something while we're listening to this. It's like a music that makes you alternately sad and happy, like at the same time. And I found it effective. I did notice, so I'm sure you know this, David, that the original book, was inspired by a tapestry in, Peter Beagle, who wrote it, was inspired by a tapestry in the cloisters. So I'm pretty sure I saw that, at least, riffs on that tapestry, if not the exact tapestry, this film, like in the background, several times.
Well,
like
the whole intro sequence is
is the,
but there's also other
tapestries.
Yeah. There's also others throughout. So that to me, that to me really worked. The all-star cast worked, and just I found the ending really, really effective. Just like the waves of unicorns coming out of the sea was such a powerful image. I had forgotten exactly how they were imprisoned. So at first I was like, maybe you could answer this. Were they turned into narwhals? And then they were like, no, they were. Okay. Yeah. I was like,
no, they were just like floating in the water, but they were afraid to come out of the water because of the Red Bull.
Yeah. And like, I like that this cartoon was not afraid to have violence, because like you have the harpy come down and eat the evil witch, and she's like, I'm immortal now because I'm the only one who's ever trapped a harpy. And like you turn around and they're like, don't look. And you don't actually see the mutilated body, but just from them not showing it actually made it worse for me. I'm like, oh my God, like that's horrible. And this is like a cartoon. But I loved it. I could go on, but I found it really great.
Yeah. Let me say, I mean, I think that just like there's just something about, and again, I'm not impartial when it comes to this movie, but you can tell that it's based on a book, and you can tell it's based on a good book. I mean, there's just something literate about the film. Just the dialogue is really amazing, and it just sort of like taps into the idea of myth and stories and what they mean to us, and whether we can believe them and all this stuff. It's just, to me, is completely different from any of these other movies that were produced around the same time on similar subject matter.
It's smart and it's sophisticated. First of all, it's so much more beautiful than any of the other films. It's just stunningly gorgeous to look at. And it struck me, as I said, I saw it when I was a kid, and it was just like, all right. And I also couldn't understand why the unicorns were in the water. Like, I remember thinking that as a kid, it's like, this doesn't make any sense. I didn't need it to make sense now. But it struck me that the whole story is actually a metaphor for men who control women. It's really about controlling men, which I found really interesting and adult about it. This was the most adult movie as well. Aside from the boobies, but.
No, and also, I mean, like the character of Molly Grew, she's like so angry when she first meets the unicorn, because she's like, you were supposed to come when I was young and beautiful, and how dare you come now? And also, King Haggard, he's like, nothing makes him happy except looking at his unicorns, and that's also, I feel like, a very like grown up like theme for the movie to deal with. Yeah. The only, and I also got really choked up at the end. Like it was exactly what you said, Matt. Very affecting. That it's about growing up, where now she feels regret. So that's like an adult thing, being able to feel regret and sorrow. So I just thought the themes of like women freeing themselves and becoming an adult and understanding what regret is really, to me, has a lot of meaning.
Can we talk about that scene that you just mentioned there about the how dare you come now? I found that one of the most poignant or most affecting scenes in the movie. And I was kind of like, I was trying to wrap my head around, like, now a unicorn is supposed to be a metaphor for female innocence, isn't it? And so I was trying to think, like, is she talking about, like, how dare you come now, like, innocence, or I was like, that doesn't quite make it seem right, or, like, true love, or, like, I was trying to figure out, like, because it really hit me, but I didn't know why. I was like,
it's
why?
Magic. It's the loss of childhood magic.
Yes.
So she believed in magic as a child, and then as she grew up, she got old and cynical, and then all of a sudden, when she's already old and cynical, and clearly she's not quote unquote the love interest, right? That then this thing comes into her life, and she's like, oh my God, you were real all along, but I've lost my connection to that. So she's really angry that she lost that. But then she realizes, oh, wait, it's here. It's still here. It's in front of me. And I can still make peace with that.
But she should be happy that she can still make peace with it. When she says, how dare you show up now? That hit me in the gut. And I was like, why?
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure it out. Like, why?
It's lost innocence. Sorry, not innocence.
Lost youth.
Lost youth, lost sense of wonder.
So she gets her sense of
that
wonder
all the
back.
Greatness is behind you.
She gets her sense of wonder back, but she didn't have it during the years when it would have mattered to her, when she would have been like raising a family or like falling in love, raising a family, all that. She didn't have that like sense of wonder about it all. She was just kind of like going through the motions maybe, and then she suddenly gets her sense of wonder back, but all the experiences of life are past her. So it kind of like makes sense. If that's what you're saying, that kind of makes sense to me, I think.
Yeah, it was really affecting, and I liked that, out of all the films we watched, a female character who's there not to be a sex object, who's has depth to her, and who has more to say than just what she looks like, and I found that affecting for all the reasons we said.
Yeah, and I love that she comes out of nowhere. Like, she's just like this. In a lesser movie, she would have been, just like a passing character. Like, oh, she's part of this band of outlaws, and the unicorn gets away from her. But no, she becomes like a central character in the movie, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, I've watched this so many times I could quote the whole thing from memory. But it was weird to see but I haven't watched it. I think I watched it once, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and then I hadn't watched it before that since I was a kid. And so watching it now, it really struck me like even all the previous, now that I'm older, all the previous times when the unicorn gets turned into a human and she's like, I can feel this body dying all around me.
Yeah.
And then when she's like, I will not love you when I'm a unicorn, like I don't want to turn back into a unicorn, like those things like really, really hit me in a way that they never did before when I was younger.
Or where she says, I'm at the beginning, she's like, I'm a unicorn. I don't know regret, only sorrow. And then at the end, she goes, now I know regret too, because she had been mortal. And I was like, wow, that was powerful. It
was really powerful. And I wondered too, the whole time I was thinking like, okay, and maybe you guys are going to say this is obvious, or maybe you're going to say you think I'm wrong. But I wondered the whole movie, like, was this like kind of a metaphor for being a woman, the whole movie? Like, she starts out and she's just total pure innocence, and then she suddenly is like, has that great scene that you just mentioned where she's like, now I can feel this body dying around me, and this is like horror. I don't like this. I don't understand anything. Nothing makes sense to me anymore. And I was like, it kind of feels like what it felt like to be an adolescent boy. But I was wondering if that's like, if that resonates, if that's what this is trying to be, like a kind of a theme for, I don't want to go too far into what Tim Powers would say. No, it's about Dracula. It's about drinking blood. Look at it, it's right there. But I wonder if this is kind of a metaphor too for what it's like to, be a young girl and then change into a woman and then have to deal with all this.
It's a growing up story. That's what regret is you learn what regret is as you get older. When I was a kid, I was saying it didn't mean anything to me because I didn't understand regret. I didn't understand sorrow. I didn't understand loss. And now as a middle-aged person, I do understand all those things. So it has meaning for me. And there's also that scene when she turns the tables on the Red Bull and fights back and fights it back. And that also is like, women taking back their power and fighting off the abuse, the abuse of men, frankly. I'm seeing it through this lens, so I can't not see it through this lens. But
another thing,
but it's. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Let me say another thing with the scene where she finally confronts the Red Bull that I had never really consciously. I mean, I think before I'd been looking at it in plot terms. It's like, oh, like the guy that she loves is killed, and that makes her angry, and so now she fights the Red Bull. But the thing I never like really picked up on before, I don't think, is that what makes her different at this point than all the other unicorns and why none of them could do this and she can is because she's had this experience of being turned into a human, and so she has all these emotions that they've never felt. And so, like, the other unicorns don't get really upset about things. They don't feel the sort of anger and hatred and want revenge. And it's only that experience of having been human that
and also mortal. That's another thing. Like, the unicorns are immortal, so therefore nothing means much to them. But when you're mortal and you can die, there's a power to that. It also reminded me a lot of, do you know the movie Wings of Desire? Where it's Wim Wenders. It's about two angels who, it's about an angel who decides to become mortal because he falls in love with a mortal woman. Mm-hmm. And, as an angel, he has no emotions. He loves all of humanity, but he doesn't understand real love. And he has to, when he becomes mortal, he understands finally what emotions are. And it's a really affecting movie if you've never seen it, but that's cool. What this reminded me of.
And I wonder too, that makes a lot of sense now. It makes more and more sense as you guys are talking, because it's like, well, all the other unicorns have, like you said, Dave, have never experienced any negative emotions or any hardships. So this is almost kind of like an explanation of, look, yes, you're losing your innocence, we get it, or you've lost your innocence, but with that comes a lot of power to overcome things that you wouldn't have otherwise had, because you wouldn't have cared about overcoming things. So that's really cool. I didn't notice all this, and I think I agree this is a great story. It's fantastic writing. The acting is great. The cast is phenomenal. I mean, Matt, you pointed out, they got the unicorn voice right. Well, when you have Mia Farrow doing it, maybe
exactly.
Maybe it's easier. You got this great actress, and you got Christopher Lee, you got Jeff Bridges and Alan Arkin, and just all these fantastic people, and then a score by America. And yet, with all of that, I can't deny it's a fantastic movie, but it just wasn't, for me, I hate to say it, but it just wasn't as enjoyable to me, because it wasn't a movie, not that there's anything wrong with this, it wasn't a movie made for me. It was made for other people. It was made for, I don't know, it was made a lot for women, but obviously for you, Dave, and you, Matt, it just didn't hit my aesthetic or what I would really enjoy in a movie. But the whole time I was watching it, I was like, this is a perfect movie made for somebody else who's not me. I get it. This is awesome. And I have no, I wouldn't, what's her name? Captain Marvel actress there.
Brie Larson.
Brie Larson.
Yeah, Brie Larson.
She got dragged through the media because and through the fans and everything, because she supposedly, which she didn't say, but she supposedly said, I don't want men to come watch my movies. Well, it's not what she said about Captain Marvel. She was talking about a totally different movie where she said, this movie wasn't made for male critics, so male critics who pan it, it's not your place to pan it. And that's kind of how I feel about this movie. I didn't thoroughly enjoy it as much as I would have if I was somebody different, but I understand, it's a very good movie, and a lot of people would really enjoy it.
Well, I would disagree and say that I don't think this is a movie made specifically for men or women or boys or girls. I think this is a movie aimed towards children, yes, but I feel like it's a story of growing up, and it's and I think that it operates like the best stories, like the best myths. They operate on a kind of subconscious level, and I think that's why it's so effective, is that it's hitting a lot of these universal emotions that we all feel. As we grow up and we lose that sense of magic, that sense of wonder, and we feel like we're losing something, but we gain something at the same time.
Yeah.
So I feel like this movie perfectly captures that within a story.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should clarify. I wasn't trying to say this movie was made only for women. I was using Brie Larson's quote and saying this movie was made for somebody who's not me. But
no, I get it. I understand. I mean, not every movie works for everybody.
Right.
I just won't talk to you anymore.
Just get on your motorcycle and just get the F out of here.
Well, as long as, if I can be permitted another little negative comment about this movie, I hate to be the only one who's got the dissenting voice, but I absolutely wanted to kill myself in the first 5 minutes, or kill whoever made the movie. It got so much better, but the first 5 minutes was so maddening to me. I mean, she asks an insane butterfly for advice. Her research skills are broken. I was like, okay, I don't know what you're trying to do, but none of this makes any sense. And if this butterfly doesn't be quiet right now,
well, let me say, Tom, because it's funny, because growing up, I would never have imagined that anybody could not love this movie, right? And at one point, John Joseph Adams watched it because I mentioned it was one of my favorite movies, and he didn't like it at all. And he's like, just like the butterfly thing alone, like that makes it a bad movie. Just all that by itself.
Well, I disagree, but I get his point. It was irritating.
No, but it's kind of interesting though, because the version that I watched growing up, my mom had taped off television, and it was like edited for time, and they had cut a lot of stuff out. And all those cuts were like 100% good cuts that the movie should have made in the first place. And so the butterfly thing was like a third as long in the version that I watched growing up. So I actually agree that the butterfly thing in the actual movie is way too long and kind of annoying. And there's like, it's weird because there's like these weird tonal shifts where almost all the movie is sort of like sad and melancholy and beautiful and haunting. And then you have just these weird moments, like with the butterfly, or with like the tree that turns into the woman with the giant breath,
Yeah,
which is the other
another yes.
You got to fit it in somehow.
Picking up on our theme there. So I mean, and those are like, I think that the parts where it's trying to be funny in that way are not always successful. I mean, I have some criticisms I could make of the movie.
Yeah,
so
I do too, but it just seems so minor. Like everybody else liked the music. I hated the music. I thought it was too melodramatic. I didn't like the where she starts singing and then he starts singing. Like, Jeff Bridges should not sing. I love Jeff Bridges, but please don't ever do that again.
Andrea, I didn't like the music either. I should have, because I love America. I love that.
I do too, but I just.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought the music, I was like, no, they're starting another song.
But even the songs, but even like the melodrama of, you know, there's the castle, dun dun dun. I was like, oh, come on, like, this is more sophisticated than that, and it should be more sophisticated than that. You know, that's like the child fantasy movie kind of music. And I guess maybe as a child, because this is one of those movies that it appeals to kids as a fantasy story, and it appeals to adults who you know, want to be sad about the fact that they're getting older and made mistakes in life and shit happens. But yeah, the movie, the music was just, it got on my nerves, but that's really my only problem with it. The butterfly thing was just weird. It didn't make me angry. It just was strange with the singing, "Won't You Come Home, Bill Bailey?" Like, what the fuck is that?
Oh my gosh.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
But other than that,
I want to go back to, I mean, Matt mentions the witch, Mommy Fortuna, and I just think there's so much interesting stuff going on there where she has this carnival of sort of sick animals, and she casts illusions on them to make people think that they're these incredible monsters out of mythology. And she says, you know, like, people only fall for these illusions because they want to. And there's this idea that, like, people can't see the unicorn. They can't tell that she's a unicorn. She just looks like a horse to them. And so the witch has to create a illusory horn on the unicorn so that they think that so that they recognize that the unicorn is actually a unicorn. And I just think there's just a lot of interesting ideas all going on there, and about belief and self-deception and
it's like I think the idea is that, like, you know, as we get older and cynical, we don't see magic anymore. We only see magic when we want to see it. Like, it's like that loss of sense of wonder, that it's very capitalist in a way. It's like, here's your, you know, 5 minutes of magic that you pay for. Now go back to your mundane life. And, you know, I think the part of the theme of this is that there's magic everywhere.
I have a slightly different take on that. To me, it felt like the 3 stages of life, where at first she's completely innocent, just wanders out into the world on her little quest to find others like herself. And the whole, like, people only see what they want to see, that self-deception thing, that's like your 20s, where you only see people as you want to see them. You only see your life as you want to see it, because you're innocent and you don't understand some of the bad things that can happen. And then the end is you become a full adult, full of regret but also an adult with power and agency now, because you know how to fight back against those sort of things. That's my, like, hot take on it.
So how does I'm really, like, I hope the listeners are enjoying this, like, digging this deep into the theme, you know, like, there's some quote, don't pick at the metaphor, it leaves a nasty scab. Oh, that's from Robert Sheckley. And Dave, you wrote a good story about that. Great story about that too. About the blackbird? Yeah. About digging and digging at metaphors until you're finally just like, it's pointless. But I don't want to go too far into it. But I was wondering, like, if that's the case, like, what you know, the old woman, how does she fit into that? The old witch. She was fascinating to me too. How she had this, it was great how she had that, the whole thing you described, Dave, how she had that traveling carnival, and she had to cast illusions, and she even had to cast one on the unicorn and the harpy, because nobody could recognize them for what they were. But the real harpy, she kind of has this interesting relationship with it, where her helper is like, it's going to get out and kill you someday. And she's like, oh, I know, I fully know it. I know it will get out and kill me, but I just love that the fact that I was able to catch it is, like, makes me so, like, proud of myself.
Makes her immortal. immortal.
I don't think she ever said immortal because she said.
I think she did. No, she goes, that way I live forever.
Kill her.
Let's ask David. You know that line.
No. Yeah, no. So the idea, Tom, is that, like, you're like, oh, I'm going to write a novel so people will remember me for generations to come or something.
Oh, immortal in that regard.
But it's that, like, Ozymandias idea that, like, no matter what you do, eventually it's all going to be turned to dust and be forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But if you like torment this immortal creature, it's always going to remember you. It's going to live forever, and so you will have this. Yeah.
So she will have an immortality through its memory.
It's kind of a pseudo immortality, which isn't that great. It's kind of like Woody Allen had that great quote in one of his short stories, like, I don't want to live on through my work. I want to live on in my apartment. But yeah.
But you get, Tom, that this is like the fact that you were here, that you did something, that you lived, will always endure. Because, but it's because, and this is the interesting thing, because you were so awful to this creature, right? Being kind, the implication is wouldn't do it. Like, you have to like scar it emotionally so that it will never forget you. Yeah,
so I get it. So the unicorn, the unicorn being the innocent young person is like, oh, well, here's an alternative. Here's one way as you start to get introduced to losing your innocence. Here's an example of what you could do. You could, try to create something through like sheer force of will that's so amazing that you'll kind of live on forever through it. Like, that makes sense as a metaphor to me now. Or do I not get that? Am I completely in the dark? Are you guys all just thinking like, oh, well, he doesn't get it?
Oh, Thomas.
Well, no, but I don't think it's just like one thing. I mean, it's, any kind of real art is subject to multiple interpretations. Yes. And I think it's interesting to see how much deeper of a conversation you can have about The Last Unicorn than any of these other movies, right? Like,
Well, it's because it has depth. It's, as you said, a real story.
Can I say, too, I worked in a restaurant that opened in the early 80s called The Last Unicorn and never had read the book or seen the movie, but I worked there for 5+ years, and the owner I would love to talk to the owner now. She was a very strong sort of, I think, like ex-hippie woman. It was her and her husband owned it, but she was, I think of her when I don't think her husband came up with a name for the restaurant, but it was kind of a hippie restaurant. It had really brilliant, amazing food. And I would love to be able to talk to her now and be like, did you get this? I mean, she clearly must have gotten the name for the restaurant from the book and or the movie. So I would love to talk to her about it now and see like what her take on that was.
Well, did they have any dishes or anything that were like Harpy burgers or something?
Well, it had, that's funny. I have an unpublished novel and it have unicorn meat in it, but anyway, no, they had artwork though all over the walls. They had this frosted glass panel over the wall above the bar that had images that I would like to go back and look at those now and be like, oh, that's from the movie, because it did look kind of like that same kind of artwork.
Yeah, I was just going to say, of course, I've been there because it's in Waterville, by Colby College, where Tom and I went to school at different times. But yeah,
that's right. I forgot. Yeah.
I also just want to mention the just the image of Prince Lear. Oh well, first of all, I'll say when I went to my parents and grandparents on a camping trip read the book to me because they had heard the movie was going to be coming out. So in preparation for going to see the movie, we read the book together first, and then we went to see the movie. And I was so taken with it that I came home and made my own little picture book version of it with little little drawings of all the scenes that stuck out to me and so on. But then the other thing that really sort of hit me from this movie as a kid was this image of Prince Lear where he like writes poetry and kills dragons. And I was like totally like, oh, that's who I want to be when I grow up. I want to be somebody I kill dragons and I write
with
poetry.
Your poetry?
Yeah.
Like Vogon.
It's like Vogon poetry.
Yeah. So yeah, I want to note that it's funny like what can have a huge impact on you when you're that age, And also like I sort of had this image of Prince Lear as this like warrior poet kind of guy, and it was weird to go back and watch the movie later and be like, oh, he's actually like not a writer at all. He's like trying to write like one sentence and it's bad. He crumples up the paper. He never actually. I had much more of an image of him as like a poet than I think the movie really justifies.
Is he a poet in the book? I have never read the book.
I actually don't remember the book really at all at this point.
It's funny. I know I read it. And I don't remember it either. I mean, I know it's a classic, but it, for some reason, didn't stick in my mind. But I feel like I should go back and read it now, though.
Yeah, I'm gonna go try it. I'm gonna go seek it out and read it. If I was thinking maybe I'd read it to my kids, but I've been reading like The Hobbit and Harry Potter books, but maybe this one would be a little bit far out of reach for a 5-year-old.
Well, this movie came out in '82, so I would have been about 5 when my parents and grandparents read it to me. So
okay, well, you might have been a little precocious compared to other kids, though.
Your kids might be a little slow. I mean, that's.
I wouldn't say they're slow, but they might not.
You're just saying this because he didn't like The Last Unicorn.
Yeah.
They might have bad taste in children's television. All right. The other thing I just want to note that I think is really interesting that I never knew until I was doing research for this is that the company that did the animation. So this was Rankin Bass is the company that made this, but they kind of outsourced. They did the script and everything, but they outsourced the actual animation to a Japanese studio called Topcraft. And like a lot of those people went on to basically be the core of the studio that would become Studio Ghibli, which is like Hayao Miyazaki's company that's like the Disney of Japan. It's done like Princess Mononoke and
I saw that too, and I was like, wow, that is amazing. That like there's so much connection between all of these movies, with Don Bluth. There was the thing about Don Bluth and Lasseter and Tim Burton for Cauldron, the whole Frazetta thing, SCTV. There's like it's amazing how much animation has influence on other filmmakers and other mediums.
Yeah.
Did you see Peter Chung, who did Aeon Flux? He was a layout artist on Fire and Ice.
Yes, I saw that too. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I looked up some trivia too, and Sir Christopher Lee apparently was a big fan of the book, and he showed up to the recording sessions, and he had an annotated copy of the book that he had made notes in, and that he would show to the director and be like, we have to have this part has to be in this scene, we have to make sure this comes in. And he even, Peter S. Beagle showed up to a recording session, and Christopher Lee went up to him after he did his lines and said, look, I really want to make sure I got that right, would you please tell me if that was wrong and I will redo it. So he was all about this movie apparently.
Yeah, well, and Peter S. Beagle wrote the screenplay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't have full creative control, obviously, and I think he was sort of unhappy with some of the stuff that they did, but he did do the original screenplay.
I think it said he came around at the end to liking it as a work of art. He thinks that he thought the art was beautiful, and so I think he actually did. Well,
in recent years, he's like gone on, like when they've screened it in movie theaters, he's gone and talked about it and stuff. So I think he's pretty happy with how it turned out at this point.
Yeah.
They're talking about doing a live action version of it as of like 2010 and 2013. Apparently, Jeff Bridges offered to do it for free. He called the director, the original director, out of the blue and said, or co-director Jules Bass, and said, "Hey, if you want to do this, I'll do this for free." And,
I think he's a little too old to play Prince Lear now, though.
Well, maybe he's thinking he would be King Haggard, though.
King Haggard seems like, yeah.
And kind of like the Tron, he started out as the hero and became the villain. Spoiler alert.
And Mia Farrow could be Molly.
Well, Angela Lansbury, they were in 2013. They were talking about doing a live action version and having her be in it as well. Which character was she? Was she the one I'm thinking of?
She was the witch.
Oh, she was the witch.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, they were trying to get her and Sir Christopher Lee involved with it as well. So.
And Michael Cera has to play Schmendrick. I mean, come on.
Oh yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about a live action version. I'll have to think about that. I mean, it would be cool for them to do some. I kind of wish what they would do is because the animation in this is a little janky. Like you can tell it didn't have the hugest animation budget, and I kind of wish they would do just kind of like a special edition or kind of thing where they would just like fill in some of the just make the smooth out the animation and.
See, I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was lovely to look at. Of all the movies, I thought it was gorgeous, the most gorgeous.
It was, but I see Dave's point. I mean, they could have George Lucas come in and maybe put like robots flying through the little
Han shooting first.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think the visual design is unbelievably gorgeous. Like any like frame from this just looks like a painting. It's just like the number of animation frames for some of the things, you know. It's not up to like Disney or like whatever, you know, but
no, but this is more like, it's like a, oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as, Disney is very Disney. Like you always know a Disney movie. This is more interpretive. I think maybe it's not the word I'm looking for, but something like that.
impressionistic.
Impressionistic. Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. So yeah, and if anyone listening to this can tell me whether Prince Lear writes a lot of more stuff in the book, let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree, Andrea. There should be a scene where they should redo it so Schmendrick shoots first.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Make it into a trilogy.
Yeah.
Blow up a Death
That would
Star,
be Peter.
They should knock over. They should fight the Red Bull at the end of every installment of the trilogy too.
Yeah.
Just like the Death Star.
The Red Bull is even bigger.
And they should all drink Red Bull.
We've got a whole red stampede this time.
Yeah.
A red herd.
There's like there's a herd of 1,000 Red Bulls that you never heard of before. They were on like a secret mist-shrouded planet, and they've just shown up for this third movie. All right, so I think we need to wrap this up there. Or actually, I don't know. Any final thoughts about any of these, about this phenomenon of animated 80s movies? That any overall impressions, Andrea?
Just that I'm too much of an old woman to really appreciate children's animation anymore. Like it has to have an edge, like Heavy Metal or Unicorn, Last Unicorn, for it to be interesting to me now. Which is, I think that's why watching those two were my favorites, because they had deeper themes and at least humor in the case of Heavy Metal, and a deep, meaningful theme. For the Last Unicorn, but everything else was just childish and somewhat boring, and too many boobies. God, good Lord.
Yeah, so everyone just make sure you show your kids Last Unicorn and Heavy Metal. I think that's the takeaway there.
Yeah, definitely Heavy Metal.
Matt, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think my favorite of the two were actually Flight of Dragons and The Last Unicorn. I did enjoy Heavy Metal, but it's not a film I want to revisit soon. Like if I had to sit down, you know, with like my family's kids or something and watch one of these, I would be like, let's watch The Last Unicorn first. And if not that one, then The Flight of Dragons. And any of the others, I'd be like, no, not appropriate. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun to revisit this and pretend like I was 10 again.
Hey, Dave, I actually have a question for you.
Yep.
Why didn't you go for The Rats of Nim, The Secret of Nim?
Well, because I want it to be more like fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of movies. I mean, pretty much there's like if it's just like animated fantasy movies, just broadly, like that's like a million movies. So I was trying to do the most core kind of genre ones. I mean, I love The Secret of Nim movie.
I love that movie, yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe we can do animal movies.
I
feel there was also...
There is magic in that one. It wasn't in the book, but in the movie they actually employed some magic in it.
Yeah, it just feels like a separate category. It was the same thing with like the Hobbit. You could say like, why don't we talk about the Hobbit or the Lord of the Rings? It's kind of like
I figured those because those were the 70s.
I guess that's true, but they also kind of feel like their own sort of category to me.
Yeah, I actually have all of those on DVD. Just FYI.
All right, cool. I guess I'll just say like I read Ralph Bakshi has an amazing biography. So you know if you're bored, go read Ralph Bakshi's biography or Wikipedia page because there's like a lot of crazy stuff on there. And so Tom, any final thoughts?
You could pretty much just clone Andrea's response and possibly cut out what she said about boobies at the end. but I do agree with Matt that, you know, if you're showing it to your kids, Flight of Dragons and Last Unicorn, and not the other ones for sure. If I was going to show any of these to my kids, it would probably be Flight of Dragons. And if you're going to watch Flight of Dragons, don't watch it. Just use the audio and put it in your head. You don't even have to see it. You can just kind of listen to it.
Yeah.
But Andrea, one final point about you mentioned the Hobbit version. I loved that. I only saw that once.
Loved it.
but I had a big, a large, like, coffee table book sized
I have that.
copy. You have that? No way. I read
Yes,
that. I read
sure
that.
do.
That was the first fantasy I
The
ever
big
came
one.
across.
It's like 12 by 12 square, and it's got like a cellophane cover with the dragon.
And it has the inside. The artwork is like inside of like a frame that's shaped like an old TV. It's kind of like ovalized, like the edges, the corners are kind of rounded off, and it has some of the best artwork. And I came across The Hobbit in 4th grade for the first time. My teacher of our Catholic school read us the Riddles in the Dark chapter, and I was like, "What the heck is that? I got to figure that out." And my mom that summer bought me that version, and I read that so many times, all the pages fell out. I wish I still had that. I'm reading it to my kid right now, and I wish I had it to be able to show him pictures.
I have my original Hobbit book that's falling apart. The cover's missing. I have all my original Lord of the Rings books too, all a mess, like held together by tape. I also have the Rankin Bass Hobbit album with the art inside.
Nice. like where they read it out loud. You mean the whole thing is read?
It's like a Disney. You know do you remember the Disney albums that they used to put out? Like it was half narrated and then half the dialogue from the movie. Okay, that's what I have. So it's like partially narrated and then partially parts of the movie
I had
on an
that
album
too. I think I had a breakdown in a store. I was really young and I saw that Hobbit book and I wanted it so badly. And my father's like, "No, you have to read the actual text. This is not you have to read the book, not this picture book crap." And I was like, "No, I want it, Daddy." And I remember having a breakdown and they finally bought it for me. And I love this book to death. I loved it to death, but then I felt really guilty about it afterwards.
I'm glad you got it. I still, when I'm reading it to my kids, lately, every night I've been reading a little bit, and I picture, like, we're at the part where the dwarves are in the hoard, and I picture vividly the part where Bilbo is standing on the hoard of gold, and there's another one where it just shows the Smaug's eye opening up with like a ray of light coming out of it, and I can those are all burned into my brain.
Yeah.
All right, we gotta start wrapping this up. So, but definitely everyone watch Last Unicorn if you haven't seen it. Show it to your kids. Show them Flight of Dragons if you want them to get interested in science. And I don't know, I liked Fire and Ice. Heavy metal, maybe check it out. Sounds like no particular reason to watch The Black Cauldron, unless you want to see the film that almost killed Disney.
Yeah.
But all right, so let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Andrea Kail, Tom Gerencer, and Matthew Kressel. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Andrea Kail, Tom Gerencer, and Matthew Kressel for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.